Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So I think this is the first time in a while that I've actually done one of these videos where I'm actually wearing a hat. And I'll get back to why I'm actually doing that. That was done intentionally, specifically for this video. But I haven't done one of these videos in a while where it's a little bit of a talking head, but at the same time, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are on the channel. And then also, I wanted to play a couple of clips for you. I did watch the most recent Golden Age of Cardboard podcast that dropped today. And there were a couple of little nuggets in there that I wanted to touch on and elaborate on. And then the point of the hat was that I saw a comment that's been going on for a while, but it was one of those things where some news over the last couple of days was actually perfect to kind of allow me to have a little bit of fun going into that discussion a little bit in depth. And obviously, but if you're reading the title, you'll kind of know where I'm going with this one, but I thought I would kind of combine a couple of things. So first one really is very simple, just some stuff on the channel. The most recent podcast episode dropped a couple of days ago, so it's already had a couple of folks checking it out, and it's been well received so far. I appreciate that. If you've got any thoughts or comments on anything on there, feel free to throw it in because we appreciate the commentary, and that kind of gives us also some insight into kind of where people's heads are at, so that's always good. And then also my conversation with John, Boggs Fan, from a couple of days back from the weekend was also really well received. And in both cases, I touched on the whole topic, the concept, not so much about the quote unquote rivalry between vintage and modern. And what I'm going to touch on here actually does kind of also play into that a little bit, but it's actually very useful because it allows kind of me to elaborate on a piece. And then I'll use somebody else's kind of discussion point on it because I think the couple of things said here were actually very good. And the idea here is to kind of get people's heads into a different space in terms of how they consider and think about it. Because at the end of the day, there is no correct path or correct way to go about it. I think we can all have our preconceived notions. We can have our preferences. We can have maybe our own journeys of how we arrive from point A to point B or vice versa. But at the same time, it's pretty much going to be what it's going to be. Really, if this hobby is being done correctly, and I say correctly in this case, literally, it should be tailored to kind of your tastes. Realistically, it should fit whatever makes the most sense for you, whatever, however the pieces fall. I think that's the combination that you should be seeking, not just replicating somebody else's path. I think in the long run will be more sustainable to you than just trying to replicate what somebody else does. Figuring out the mix, because it may not be exactly a certain ratio. It might be, or it might be just full bore leaning into one thing. And the clips here that I'm going to play, and Golden Age Cardboard is a vintage-based podcast. But I thought that a couple of the comments included in this I thought were very useful, which I thought would be helpful in order to get a couple of thoughts across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the first clip, and then I'll talk about a couple of things that struck me from it, and then I'll play the second clip at the end. I'll go into that. And then from there, I'll talk about basically why I'm wearing the hat and what was my thought that led me into that piece. But I'll include a link in the description to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast episode. So this one was with Dr. James Beckett. I do have my fun on the Friday, and obviously the name is a little bit alluding to it. If you watch the Friday live stream, you'll get it. But realistically, in this case, regardless of the source, I like when there are some interesting thoughts brought to the table. And there definitely was here. So I think this is where I think there's some value in listening to it and then also discussing it a little bit. And then at the same time, if you want to check out some of those other things, I will include a link in the description to those as well, because then we may end up touching on some of that on Friday. I'm not sure yet. I know Bobby ended up going to a card show locally, so we can definitely touch on that. And then it'll be whatever else we want to talk about. It'll be the usual Friday night thing, 8 p.m. Eastern, longest running episodic, whatever it is. That's basically what we're doing on the channel. So let me play the first clip here for you. We'll listen to it, and then we'll touch on a couple of things that kind of caught my ear from this. And then again, all the links in the description will be there if you want to listen to the whole thing in its entirety. I'll recommend it. I think there's some good topics and discussion brought up, so I think it'd be worthwhile your time if you do want to check it out. Okay, I've got it sped up ever so slightly, so for the most part, it shouldn't throw you off too much. But what I'll do is I'll kind of back away here and I'll let it run for a little bit to play this one clip, and then we'll pause, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it.
Yeah. At this point in your hobby life, do you get bored? I mean, I see you at Dallas shows and you don't look bored to me, but at the same
I would get bored if I totally concentrated on vintage. I would get bored because I'd be looking at a lot of the same cards. And the only thing I'd be thinking about is this a good deal? Or did I used to have this card? Or do I already have this card? Or something like that. So, and that's the stuff that, when I started the magazines and the price guides, it was really me, myself, and I for a while.
Yeah.
And so all that vintage stuff, I had to be the expert on that. And I was a dealer in it as well. So, so now I wouldn't get bored. I like looking at it, but I have my own stuff. And so that's why I kind of I've created a new lane for me that is guaranteed to keep my interest, because it's a learning experience going into things that I don't have as great a knowledge about.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there. I'll come back to it in a second, but I'm going to zoom in again. Let me touch on that, because I actually think this was a very interesting statement made by Beckett on this one. And it actually kind of, again, I had a little bit more fun in the approach that I took to it on both conversation with John. I got to be a little bit wacky with it. I had a little bit of fun with it. If I talked about it on Friday, I would definitely be off the wall. We'd have some wackiness on there. But I think he touched on a very good point on this. And the question came down to the whole idea of boredom. Well, and I'm going to give the caveat right now. If you are someone who is either new into collecting vintage or someone who has a deep passion for it, there is plenty of depth there to keep you engaged and keep you interested. Realistically, especially if you pursue something like pre-war. Pre-war has enough going on that if you are really into it and you want to go into depth, like some of that stuff is really obscure. Some of it's very tough to come by. Some of it is extremely well researched. So if you want to read up on it, there's lots to pursue in there. But somebody like Beckett there, who was collecting kind of in the heyday back then, where if you were collecting vintage, you were collecting pre-war, meant that you were putting together sets and you were working on some of this stuff back then, when it was actually in some ways, in some cases, a little bit more available, only in the sense that modern at that point was 70s. So, 60s was still obviously very available. Even 50s still would have been relatively available. So going back to pre-war, while it still was obviously further in the past, if stuff was being uncovered initially in those initial finds, it was kind of available. And you had a smaller community of people trading these things. So if you're going to trade vintage at that time, well, you're pretty much going pre-war. So in other words, a lot of that stuff was available. Now, one caveat I'm going to give here, I'm going to make a statement, but I'll also kind of couch it in a way that'll be helpful, hopefully, is that kind of playing into what he's talking about. He had the vintage, he worked on those sets, and he talks about more of that. He elaborates more in the conversation. But it would be boring to him, kind of paraphrasing what he was saying there, it would be boring to him if he only focused on vintage. Not because vintage is inherently boring, but actually because he already had it. He wouldn't be learning new things necessarily, and I'll give my caveat on that in a second. But more than anything, because he already had the exposure, he already had the experience dealing with it, it would be just a question of, all right, can I get a good deal? Or do I already have this? Or is it something I want? That's it. It would be very, clinical from that way. If you're completely new to this and you don't know anything, then it's going to be completely new to you. It's going to be basically every acquisition is going to be exciting for you because you're going to be chasing, you're going to go into the REA auctions or one auction house, chasing after the specific cards, looking up specific variants, maybe learning more about it. Like T206 is a great example. You've got all those back and front variations. Well, learning what the specific checklists are, what cards are possible, what cards have been discovered so far. So there's plenty there. But one thing, and kind of touching on basically what he was alluding to, is that vintage is mainly, the caveat word is mainly static. And static is not an insult. It's just a statement that a lot of what we know about a lot of the sets is currently established. Can there be more finds that can give us more information? Absolutely, 100%. But that's basically what you're looking for. If something is going to change, it's going to be because somebody discovered something that hadn't been found or researched up until this point. And some of the research for some of these sets is pretty extensive. Take T206, for example. There have been books written about it. There is an ebook that you can find in Net54 where you were able to find for many years that actually was very well researched. It was compiled by a lot of the folks in that community, and they put together extensive checklists where you can see all the different back variations and even give some speculation about possibilities based on, eras, players, kind of the way those different tobacco companies did their business. And you can pretty much allude to possibilities of what combinations may be possible. So you can speculate even on stuff that hasn't been found yet. So if it is found, if it's something that falls within that, then at least there's some logic to it. That doesn't mean we can't find something out of left field that is completely unexpected. That's totally possible. But what happens, and kind of the difference, one of the differences between the vintage and modern game is that obviously you'll listen. One of the laments is, but there's just so much stuff and it's overly the new stuff is overly complicated. They're doing all these parallels and all this stuff. I can't keep track of it. And I say that's fair. I think that's completely fine. My counter though is like, well, it's constant complexity. It adds more stuff all the time. The point is it changes. It's more dynamic. Just inherently it's more dynamic. And that's what Beckett was alluding to there. By looking at newer stuff, he is just not familiar with it because there's just so much of it. You can go into it and kind of go down a couple of rabbit holes, and he'll look through those bargain bins, just looking for stuff that he hasn't seen before, and then kind of testing. In some ways, what he's really doing, in effect, is kind of testing his knowledge, testing his ability to analyze, try to figure it out. It's a good thought exercise, honestly. And it can keep things interesting for you. And it should be instructive that he, at this point, having been around the hobby as long as he has been and been synonymous with aspects of it, that he still looks for those challenges. And the challenges sometimes are just intellectual. It's just, you're challenging yourself. Looking at a 52 Topps baseball set is not a challenge intellectually. It can be a challenge financially. It can be a challenge in terms of tracking down maybe specific cards that you're interested in. But the checklist is a checklist is a checklist. If you've got enough money and you can afford to do so, and you track down the singles, or you know some contacts that can help you with that, I can get you a 52 top set put together. There's no intellectual challenge to it. Again, there's a financial challenge to it. Or if you are very condition specific, you want something specific that narrows down the field, that can create a huge challenge for you. But in terms of what it is what it is for the most part. You know, we'll find, maybe someday we'll find some weird variation of the 52 tops mantle beyond the type 1 and type 2 and those kind of combinations. But until then, more of it, it's fairly static. If you want to build a 52 top set and you build it in a similar condition to somebody else's, your sets should look pretty similar because it's the same set. Whereas there's new stuff being produced all the time. It might not be exciting, might not be interesting, but it is dynamic. It is different. And I just thought it was interesting that he brought up that point that if he just focused on the vintage at this stage of his collecting career, your mileage may vary, you may be completely different, then it would be a little boring, which isn't a condemnation of the cards. It's just a lack of variety and a lack of difference is going to make it a lot less interesting. And that's, I think, a reasonable point to make. And that's why I thought it was kind of interesting that he brought it up and actually stated it that way. And I agree. I am actually completely in agreement. But that still doesn't mean that you can't. And that still doesn't mean it may not interest you more to go down that path, because you may not have seen everything yet, or you may not have seen enough different things yet, where there may still be new discoveries for you as you figure it out. And if that's the case, go for it. I think there's a lot of value in going down that. So one of the points that I was making in those conversations that I was talking about earlier is that I do think there's value in experimenting and trying some of these things. Obviously, don't jump in with both feet unless you're really confident about it. But otherwise, if you want to dip your toe in it and check it out, I think there's a ton of value to it. And before I got to the point that I'm at now, where most of the stuff I'm going to do is going to be modern, it's predominantly because I have had the chance to have exposure. I've had T206 cards in here, Hall of Famers and different things, bought and sold some, kept some. I've still got some T206s still. If I ever do anything with it, it'd probably be something based off the Toronto team, thematically appropriate. Obviously, it's not the same Toronto team, but it would be thematically appropriate. But there's only a handful of cards, but there are a lot of back variations. So that could be something that could be a project. Not something I'm looking to do anytime soon, but that would be a possibility. And there are some other pre-war sets that cover that Toronto International League team, which could be interesting. But again, not something I'm looking to do anytime soon. But that possibility is there. That's the point. But I'm aware of it already. So it's one of those things where if I did decide to go down that path, then I could build a checklist out, because at least I already have an understanding built into it. But the only way you get that understanding is to dip your toe in and try to understand it. I've had some caramel cards, some strip cards. M116 is one that I enjoyed early on. It's not exactly the most common one, but it's certainly not the rarest by any stretch of the imagination. But I had a couple of those singles in my possession, and I checked those out. And by having them in hand and actually looking at them and being able to evaluate them a little bit, looking at the checklist, learning about that back in my formative collecting years, it gave me a lot of information. And it also showed me what I liked and what I don't like. And I think developing that taste, I think, is extremely valuable to you as a collector. But if you've already landed on your niche, you've already got your spot and everything, then I think that's great. You're ahead of 95% of the hobbyists out there who are still kind of feeling their way around. The people that are the most influenced tend to be folks that haven't figured out what that is. They haven't figured out what their lane is fully yet. And that's been kind of the theme of this past week. A lot of folks are still working out their lane. But if you've already got it, then thumbs up to you, because you're already ahead of the game, I think, from my perspective. All right, so with all that said, I'm skipping ahead a little bit in the conversation. Again, I'm including the link in the description to the whole thing, so you can listen to what led up to this specific piece of the clip that I'm using. I'm using a couple of specific clips because I want to focus on a couple of the statements said, because I think there's some interesting stuff in there. But if you want the full context, I recommend checking out the conversation. It was about 47 minutes, so it's not too bad if you can listen to it pretty quickly. But I think there was some interesting stuff in it. So here, Beckett is actually going to give what I think is a very interesting kind of follow-up point to that first one. And I think it's a good one just for perspective. And I'm a big fan of this thought because this is kind of the philosophy that I've taken to kind of my collecting thing. And I'll touch on and elaborate a little bit, but I think it's helpful to hear it from somebody who is already even further down the road, who's already done even a million times as many things, from being a collector, a dealer, a show promoter, the price guide, and being synonymous with the company that bears his name, all of these things. Ignore the guy with the YouTube channel. You can listen to this guy here who is saying something that the guy on the YouTube channel actually happens to agree with quite a bit. And I actually think it's a very interesting point that I think is worthwhile showcasing here and talking about a little bit further. So let's hit the button and let's hear that.
I will say this, I'm thinking through this. I really sell my dad's cards, so I kept those. But some of the stuff from the 50s, I had a 53 set, I sold it.
But you could get, I guess, like you said, you never owned a DeLong, Gehrig. What keeps you today? Because you could go find that card if you wanted to. What keeps you from acquiring that card today? Well,
because it'd be one card on my card wall.
Right.
And it'd be meaningful to you because and to many people that are advanced collectors, but it's just not, I've given myself permission to lighten up and not be as driven. I think there's a difference between healthy drive and drivenness. And I probably was a little bit driven, but driven can be toxic. I don't want to be toxic. I want to be therapeutic, is enjoying the reasonable chase, the reasonable hunt.
So that second clip was actually really good because I did, like I said, I love the perspective that was brought on there. And it was talking about the idea, because obviously, again, your story is going to be different than mine. I think I do have an affinity for some of those 50 sets, very specific ones. I've got ones that I'm working on right now. I actually got the notification that it looks like delivery will be coming tomorrow with some 53 Bowman Color singles that I ordered. So that'll be coming in as part of the set. I also did get some mail today for some newer stuff. I'll talk about this in a minute, but there'll be a separate video related to that. But the point that I'm making here is that I think it was interesting to hear it from that perspective, to hear someone, again, who has been down this road already quite a ways and built already a great collection, sold some items, obviously, as he was building up his empire. But then at the same time, with the ability now to go back and purchase either items that he already had or items that he hasn't had previously, but he had chances to get, but he maybe fell short on an auction. And he gave some examples. So I think, like I said, it's worthwhile hearing the whole conversation so you get the full context. But I thought it was interesting to hear his perspective on, at this stage, there are things that still pique his interest, but the items that may mean something to somebody else, and he used Mike as an example with the DeLong Gehrig, may not necessarily be something that he's looking for. And a healthy pursuit, a measured pursuit, and that's basically what he's alluding to at the end of that. And I think that is a very good point that is worth repeating, because I think a lot of people kind of became enamored with the idea. And I've talked about this before previously on my own channel with my own history in this. At one point, my thought was to do, the Topps Bowman run. But more than anything else, it was just like, it seemed like the thing to do, as opposed to having a genuine passion for all the sets in between, all the cards in between, and things I don't. And as time went on and I started getting more and more of those cards, I realized that's why I have like a run of a bunch of the 70s sets already completed and some sets that are almost done. There are some that I'm going to complete. I have a 70 top set that will probably get completed. I actually like the 70 top set, as plain and boring as the gray borders are. 60 top set, which I do actually like. I like the color on those cards, so it's enjoyable to me. But that'll be, down the road. It's part of a roadmap that I have, but it's not an urgent thing. So with a limited collecting budget, I can't get everything at the same time. I'm choosing the order in which I'm pursuing things. My player collections kind of take priority for me. Those are my main projects that I like. Well, a lot of those are modern. Why? Because I happen to enjoy them more. If I have a choice between all these different items, I'm probably going to pick something that'll fit into that player collection, because that's just my preference. That's the way I like to do it. But if you really like building sets, and again, I'm not passionate about set building, but I do have some sets that I built, and I do have some sets that I'm probably intending to work on at some point. But again, they're projects. It's something that I will do. My intention is to keep doing that, but it's going to be this long-term kind of view. It's the roadmap thing, as opposed to just be like an urgency to go after it at this time. And there are cards that I have sold that if I was still going to be pursuing that would be like key cards to it. I had a 52 Bowman Mantle, which was a great card, and I got a great price on it, which was the going rate at the time. But then I sold it for multiples of what I bought it for. I don't regret that, because I wasn't going to do the set. Once it became clear to me I wasn't going to work on the 52 Bowman set, and I had no desire to do so, well, then it didn't make sense to hang on to the card. But if I was going to do the set, well, then obviously it's a key piece to put that thing together. I will never own a 51 Bowman Mickey Mantle rookie. That's not going to happen. I will not own a 52 Topps Mantle. Doesn't matter how much money I make. Doesn't matter if I win the lottery tomorrow, because it doesn't serve any purpose for me. That doesn't mean they're not great cards. That doesn't mean they're not iconic cards. That doesn't mean that they're not cards that at one point I thought about, well, wouldn't it be interesting if I had? But now at this stage, it's like, yeah, it would be interesting. But then it's just, again, at a much lower scale, but it would be just another card on the wall. A very fancy card, an iconic card. But would it mean that much to me? And the answer for me, after a while, it became clear the answer was no. I'm not willing to sacrifice. I'm not willing to take the steps that would be required, because it's still possible. It is something where I could sell a bunch of stuff that I got and probably be able to cobble together the funds to do it. But then, okay, so now I've got this other card. What am I supposed to do now? I guess I put it in safe, throw it in the bank vault. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I've still got a piece of cardboard. And again, it's just perspective. That's kind of why I thought it was good to have that clip playing and have the words said by somebody else. It's good to have somebody else say it, and I couldn't agree more. But obviously he's coming at it from a different perspective, but in the end he kind of came to a similar conclusion to what I came on my end. And I thought it was interesting that when I heard that, my ears kind of perked up, because I was like, yeah, I agree with that. I thought it was kind of interesting that came out. So overall, a good conversation, and I think just from those two clips, already I kind of piqued my interest. And then I will say some other good conversation was included in that. So I'll recommend you to check it out. I've included those links so you can check it out and get some additional and kind of get your own thoughts on it. So credit to Mike for putting together a good conversation there, asking some good questions that actually led to some interesting discussion and also some interesting points. Good on them both. All right. So with that said, let me talk about the other thing. See, doing a little old school talking head video. Man, I haven't done one of these in a while. It's been a bit. All right. So real quick, the reason I'm wearing the cap. So I wanted to actually touch on something a little bit lighthearted, tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I thought it was worthwhile. It's one of those things where Ed Wesker Griff always kind of poses the question, and he does it on Big Scott's, comment section. He's also done it in the comments and different things. He's a big fan of it. He talks about, people, watch the games, which is nothing wrong with that. I think it's a perfectly valid thing. And basically what they're talking about is they're talking about people, collectors, flippers, all the above. How can you collect or flip or do whatever if you're not really watching or observing the sport, is kind of the subtext behind the question. But it kind of goes almost in the same category as the whole, I don't understand why. And then I always kind of go with what I said, but like, is it really your place to understand why? But in this case, the question's posed, so I thought it'd be kind of funny to have a little bit of fun with it, because I'm going to push back on it a little bit. And I'm going to say, no, you don't really have to watch the games, but let me tell you why. I'll get, again, just my perspective, and I'm only going to give you my perspective on this. And I thought the hat was thematically appropriate for this. So let me quickly touch on it. So first one, when you're talking about that, if you're asking the question, it's like, well, can you be a collector and not watch the games? Well, I say to you, yes. And how do you do that, you might ask? Well, the answer is you buy the card, and then when the game is on, you don't watch it. Now, I assume that wasn't a satisfactory answer to the question. You might need a little more elaboration than that, I guess, would probably be helpful. So I guess we can do that. But why not? We'll elaborate a little further. So here's the thing. There's really two groups you're talking about. You're talking about the flipping kind of seller group. So for them, you literally don't have to watch the games at all. And I'll touch on a couple of things with this. So you don't have to watch the games at all. The reason is because you're a flipper, you're a seller, your main preoccupation is really just trying to make money off of it. Well, at the end of the day, you're selling widgets. The folks that romanticize the cardboard, they might not like hearing that, but at the end of the day, cards are no less a widget than anything else. If your goal is to make money on it and that's it, and that's your only goal, then your job is just to buy it at the correct price or as little as possible. And then as long as there's a marketplace and someone who wants to buy it at the other end of the transaction, it doesn't matter what the widget is. It can be a pair of shoes. It can be a baseball card. It can be an antique lamp. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. A widget is a widget is a widget. They're all interchangeable. It doesn't make any difference. So just because you like the player on the front of the card doesn't mean make it any more special as a widget. It just needs a buyer on the other end of it. That's it. As long as you got that and you got it at a price that allows you to make some margin, you have successfully traded a widget. And that's why you don't need to watch the games. But is it true that being more of an observer allows you to potentially have some insight and maybe have a better understanding of who might actually be good and maybe is undervalued, somebody that may have some more potential to be able to do something? So in other words, allow you to go beyond the very surface level of the price and selling, buying price, selling price, versus the potential upside? Yes, absolutely. More knowledge is not bad. Knowledge is indeed power. So the more you understand, the better you understand, then you're going to be better off. Now, you could probably get by just on having an understanding of the issue, the series or the set or the insert or whatever it is. Just knowing that is enough. You don't have to watch a single second of the sport. But if you know something about the set, the series, the insert or whatever, that would probably be enough to get you by. But again, that's still knowledge. So if you have that knowledge, that works. And if you have knowledge of the sport or the character or whatever it is, then yes, that's going to help you even more as well. Because then you'll have that additional layer. You can tack those layers on, and that will make you a better flipper. That's just truth. But do you need to? No, you don't. Second half of it, collector. So that's the part that I think is a little bit more something that he focused more on. So let's talk about that one. Do you need to be a fan of the sport to be a collector? Again, no. And that is because they are objects. Why you're collecting the object? This goes back to my infamous question near the beginning of the channel when I started doing these videos. I posed the question to people, and some people have to this day, kind of percolated on this still. Figuring out your why. Why are you doing this? When you could be doing something else with your time or your money, why are you doing this? I can't answer that question for you. You've got to figure that one out on your own. But when you figure that out, it's going to tell you a lot about how your approach either should be or versus what it is right now or what it could be. And that's going to help you, I think, just as much as anything else. So the why is going to be relevant because And I'll use just the example here because all I can do is use my own example for one avenue that you could take on this. When it comes to the collecting side of it, I'm not as sentimental as most. So when I'm collecting a lot of my stuff that I collect, it's because I like it or because it interests me. For me, it's oftentimes the product in as much as the individual items. And that's something I touched on in the last couple of podcasts and videos. And that's something I was kind of fixating on recently because I really wanted to kind of elaborate and flesh this out a little bit. It's as much the project as anything else. And what I mean by that is that when I'm looking at it, the individual items themselves don't necessarily excite me as much as potentially the final result. So when I'm working on that 53 Bowman color set, I use that example with John. I said, getting another single to knock it off the checklist is big because it gets me closer to the end result. Getting that complete set, I think the totality of it is where I'm going to get my satisfaction. That's where I'm going to get my enjoyment. But spending the time studying the individual players on the individual cards, it adds a romanticism to it. And I think someone like Bowman 53 does a tremendous job with that. And actually, I think makes some great videos as a result of that. But do I personally care who this New York Giants player from 1952, the image that was taken 52 or 53, that appears on this card? Not necessarily. But they're still part of the set. They're still part of the totality, the overall project. And they're still a piece, a component that's going to get me to that end result. And that result is the part that interests me the most. That doesn't mean that I don't have a general interest in the history of the game or the history in general. I was a history major. That was basically what I grew up in and what I studied. But the reality of it is that I don't have the energy or the inclination to go deep on that when basically to me, it's a project that I'm working on. The project itself is the thing for me, is basically what I'm trying to get at there. Bringing it over to the other side of it, obviously these players have long since stopped playing. So what about the other side? What about the modern side of the equation? So let's talk about that. So, wearing the hat basically just to kind of have a little fun with this portion of it. But the thing is, and it's very funny, is that I started watching baseball in the early 90s. The first baseball game I attended in person was 1991, September of 91, and it was against the Baltimore Orioles. I don't remember too much specifically about the game, but I remember it was the Baltimore Orioles in September of 91. Now, back in 1991, that was actually, if memory serves me, the same year that Cal Ripken won the MVP, I think. I think it was MVP in 91 for the American League. Regardless, that was at the time when the Dome was filled consistently, and they were getting 4 million fans per year, and it was actually a difficult ticket to get back then. Since then, it's picked up again, but so that was kind of the early days of my fandom and also my collecting. But by the time that 92 rolled around, the Jays win the World Series. 93 rolls around, the Jays win the World Series, and I was 9 and 10 years old, and I remember watching those World Series vividly. I was a big baseball fan, and I grew up on it, and I also played baseball, so I was doing that. And basically, I played almost into high school. And as a fan, as a collector, I had started my baseball card collecting by then. And then by the mid 90s, I was collecting some vintage. I was also collecting a little bit of modern, but vintage actually predominantly in my early days there. So that's where I learned a lot of the stuff that I knew later on because I studied the books. Basically, we had the big thick SED almanac, or I guess I forget if it was an almanac or whatever, but it was basically the thick book. I remember having the 1998 copy. It had modern and vintage, but basically it made it this gigantic tomb. You could beat somebody to death with the damn thing. Later on, they eventually split it, which is the right thing to do because the modern side kept getting bigger, but then the vintage side of it stayed. It still was a pretty decent amount. I've got I think it's right there. I've got just the vintage part of it because they separated it out years later, but they don't do the SCD one anymore. But regardless, the point was I studied that kind of cover to cover and really learned about some of those, even some of the more obscure series. It was very interesting. It's one of those things where now obviously we don't spend a lot of time on that stuff anymore. We just kind of just ask questions. We ask somebody to give us everything and lay it out for us, explain the whole thing. By the way, there's a whole niche for that. You really could go into a lot of depth, especially in pre-war stuff. But the point is that as I built up all my collecting and I was learning that side of it, I remained a baseball fan all throughout. And I was basically going to tons of games. I think in the course, I've gone through probably 200-300 games at the Dome over the course of my lifetime. I was a season ticket holder in 2013. That was a gift to myself for my 30th birthday. I bought that season ticket thing. So that's actually that box there was from 2013 season tickets. All the stuff came inside of it, which was actually kind of fun. It was fun to be a season ticket holder for a year, but then it became a lot more expensive right after that. I actually have a team jacket that I've got sitting in the closet that I don't really get to wear. I still have it. It's funny that it came as part of that. And I have an autographed baseball the season ticket holders got as well. So at the time you actually got a decent amount of stuff. I think the season tickets were like $600 for the whole year, and you got like a $300 jacket with it. So it was a great deal, honestly. And then right after that, I think they bumped it up to like $1,500, $2,000 immediately thereafter. And then Rogers, our cable conglomerate, bought it, well, you're not getting it for $600 anything. $600 is going to get you nosebleeds somewhere, and you're not getting season tickets for anything. That might be a ticket package. But all through the 90s into the 2000s, I was going to tons of games. So at that time, I was buying like these 12 game passes and stuff like that. So I'm going to all these games, and I have a lot of fond memories, especially the World Series teams for sure. But even some of those mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s teams, which were developing, but they simply weren't as good. I still have fond memories of them. I enjoyed watching the Carlos Delgados develop, the Roy Halladay's develop, Sean Green, Shannon Stewart. I enjoyed that. And also even Raul Mondesi and those guys. Like, I had a lot of fun with that period, even though there were some legitimately bad players. I enjoyed heckling Josh Towers because he was terrible. And I remember Luke Prokopek, and I remember a lot of these players that honestly aren't worth remembering. So that was kind of the height of my baseball fandom, even into the 2000s. And I kept watching. It was one of those things. I'd watch Sunday Night Baseball. I'd watch all of these things. But what happens is, and this is what's funny about it. The question was, why would you be a collector? Or how can you be a collector and not watch the game? So I'm going to get to that here in a second. So you've got all this background on it. Obviously, I was a big fan to the point that I'm watching all these games. And I actually got on the MLB.TV streaming package early on. And, this week was the big thing was the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Is he going to re-sign the big extension? Well, he had the self-imposed deadline passed, and he didn't sign the extension. Okay. So now he's probably going to go to free agency this next year, and we'll see. They're probably not going to re-sign him, to be honest. They don't seem inclined to pay whatever it is he wants. And at this point, I don't know if he'd go for anything less than market value. So I don't think any hometown discounts are coming as a result of that. That doesn't bother me, to be honest. The Vladimir Guerrero Jr. conversation could be a separate one. Of course, though, that is going to disappoint and sadden a lot of people because Bo Bichette will probably be gone as well. And those are kind of the young guys of today. The last time that it was kind of an exciting group, really, was that 2015-2016 with Jose Bautista, Edwin Encarnacion, and all those guys. I enjoyed watching those runs. But as time went on, I was watching less and less of the games. And that is kind of the point that I want to get at here with this piece. Like I said, I just wanted to talk through it a little bit. The thing is, there's just more options today. So I talked about my early fandom and that whole thing where I was obsessed with the game and watching all the games and everything. Well, obviously, number one, I had more time on my hands. Although, I can make time today if I really want to, but I'll touch on that in a second. But the thing is that at that time, that was kind of an obsession. It was kind of something that it was something I did. I was watching all these games because we have them here, and now and I have the cable package. I can watch all 162 Jays games without even a problem. I can watch it streaming, or I can watch it on my TV. I can put it up on the big screen and have it on. But personally, my choice oftentimes is not to do that. And as years went by, I was watching less and less of the games, although I'd still watch a fair number of them or put them on the radio. I'd mix and match between TV and radio, but I had both options. Well, at a certain point, though, you reach a stage where like the regular season games just don't mean that much to me. And where it comes up the thing is that there are just other options available. There's a lot of things like I'm recording this on the 19th, February 20th. Season 3 of Reacher will be on Amazon Prime, and I'll be binge watching that. I watch a ton of YouTube. And reality is I actually have a podcast over in one of my tabs here. So as soon as I'm done recording this and editing and getting it uploaded to the channel, I'm going to probably sit down and watch that or listen to it at the very least. I was listening to that Golden Age of Cardboard podcast that was part of this video. And above all else, just based on what I just said, I also make videos. I make content. I look for things that I might be able to use either for the podcast episode or for the Friday live stream, stuff that I gotta come up with different ways of making fun of Eric. Like, this takes time. All of this takes preparation and time. So like everyone else, I've only got 24 hours in the day. There's only so much time to be able to do all these things. So at a certain point, you got to make choices. As an entertainment value, as an entertainment property, a lot of times these live sports are kind of the ones that go. After I'm done this as well, I'll probably be watching the AW Dynamite episode. I'll watch it on replay and I'll kind of zip through the parts that aren't as interesting to me so I can get through it quicker than the 2 hours, but it doesn't change the fact that I'll devote a little bit of my time tonight to watching that. That's something I like to do, and that's something I want to do. The point is, it's what I want to do. I want to watch season 3 of Reacher. I enjoy that series. When Fallout eventually comes out, I want to watch that. I don't have Netflix turned on, but when the next season of Lincoln Lawyer shows up, I'll probably turn it on for a little bit and binge watch that show. So the thing is, there's a handful of shows I'll watch, but the majority of it, I've got it off. And when it comes to live sports, don't really watch baseball, regular season baseball anymore. I'll turn it on for the playoffs. The playoffs is where I get interested because now there's stakes. The games mean something. So I'm more interested at that point. Same thing with hockey. I don't really watch any regular season anymore. Now you could say, well, your favorite hockey player retired more than a decade ago. That's true. But another one of the ones that I collect is actually captain of the team. He's captain of the Dallas Stars, Jamie Benn. So I could still be watching all the games just to watch, but It's a regular season game. It doesn't really mean that much. The only thing that I'll watch regular season is football at this point. And the reason I can do that is because if I want to watch all the Green Bay Packer games, it's 17 games for a regular season. And then this year it was one playoff game. 18 games for the entire year. That's a commitment I can make. Beyond that, I've just got a lot of other options. So how can you collect without watching the sport? Really easy, actually. Surprisingly easy. Because it's, for me, and again, I'll only speak for myself, but I know that it's possible for other people. It's when you're collecting the thing, it could be the project or the act itself. Looking through eBay safe searches, going through ComC, trying to look through all these different platforms to try to find these items to get a missing piece, to build towards a project. This thing is actually, this card that I referenced a little earlier. So that's part of my Mike Modano collection. It's an autographed card. It's from the Cup. It's actually got a piece of memorabilia on it. It checks a couple of the boxes. And there's a lot of aspects of that I like. But it's one of those things where this is a post-playing days card. I don't need to buy any more post-playing days cards. But if it's something I like or something I'm interested in, then I'll still will. Well, again, Mike Modano isn't going to record any more points, any more goals, and there's no game that I can watch that is going to have him playing in it. So it's one of those things where, like, if it was just about watching then maybe I should be focusing on the Jamie Benn collection. But the truth is, I like focusing in on this one still. I like focusing in on the Brett Favre cards. He doesn't play anymore. So it's one of those things where it's one part that my favorite players don't play anymore, but it's also another part. And I know this for some people, I'll touch on it briefly. I know that for some people it's, they changed the sport. I don't like this aspect of it. To be honest, that's not really a thing for me. I would watch baseball today, even with the current rules and whatever they want to do with it, if it was something that I felt was must watch for me. It's not. That was the point I was making earlier. You could go back to all the old rules. It's not must watch for me anymore. I just have more options. So it's going to be, for me, whatever engages me the most at this time. And that's kind of, ironically, when I did that clip from Beckett and Mike, he was talking about not necessarily going back to buy cards he either had before or cards that he missed out on the first time, but maybe now would just be cards in the back of the wall. It's the same kind of thing. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. I don't feel any sense of obligation to it. I don't owe the sport anything. I've already devoted plenty of my youth and plenty of my time to it. But at the same time, I still enjoy the sport. But I enjoy the sport. It's just the game itself right now, a regular season game, does nothing for me. It doesn't matter who wins. It doesn't matter who loses. If there's some kind of a notable event, I can watch a highlight. It's just so much easier. I can literally go on this and see the highlight, and I wouldn't have missed anything. Watching it live doesn't add that much additional value to it for me. So for me, I can literally go years at this point without really watching much of any of it, outside of, again, playoffs. And I don't feel like I'm missing much. So, and that, again, that's just one person. That's just me. But when I look at it, it's basically what motivated me today, ironically. I didn't realize that I still had it on. I thought I had already done it. But the MLB.TV, the streaming package with all the baseball games, I had it probably going 10, 12 years, maybe 15 years back. I had a grandfathered package from a long time ago, whenever close to when they started, because I think when they started, I actually subscribed to that package, and I've had it ever since. And this year I've turned off the auto renewal so that it won't charge me for that. And this will be the first year that I won't have it turned on, because I know I'm not going to watch the games. And realistically, if I want to watch them, I can pretty much tune in and watch all the Jays games that I want. I may go to the game at the Dome this year, or I may not. I haven't gone to a game since probably 2018. Because it's just not something that I feel like going out of my way to do, because it's time commitment. And it's one of those things where I just value my time more. So it's just not something that I feel like I need to devote my time to. But what's funny is, even though the game doesn't necessarily necessitate my time commitment, I still like collecting the cards. So even as a collector, I collect the cards for the cards. I collect them for the project that is the cards. Seeing the current players play doesn't really have any bearing on that for me. Even if I do have one existing current player that I do collect in the baseball side of it. Soto is going to the Mets. That should be interesting. I might watch a little bit of that. I might catch in, if I can happen to catch upon something, I may watch a couple of clips of that, but I don't need to be sitting there watching every single at bat. I don't need to be sitting there watching every single game. If they make the playoffs, I'll watch that. I'll be very interested to see what happens with that. And I'll probably still collect Soto cards, to be honest. So I guess it is possible to not watch the games, even as a collector, and not really care what's going on with the current state of the game. The Jays might be good. The Jays might be bad. I'll worry about it if they can make the playoffs. They just need to win enough games to make the playoffs. And if they manage that, then I'll watch more closely. Otherwise, it'll just be checking out the box scores and the odd clip here and there. So it can be done, believe it or not. I just thought it was kind of funny. And then the Vladimir Guerrero Jr. news kind of made it more interesting for me made it more topical. Plus, it let me throw out my ProFit hat. I've got a couple of these now, and I just haven't had the chance to wear it. So I might have to go to the dump just to wear one of the newer hats. This is one of the newer ones. I've got a couple of really beat up ones that I still keep around, but I don't think I'm gonna wear those anymore. So anyway, I think that's enough of that. I just wanted to go over a couple of things. I did want to kind of shout out that podcast episode. Had a couple of clips in it that I thought were interesting. Check out the full version of it. Link in the description if you do want to check it out. And again, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it. Obviously, most folks, I think, would be more inclined with Ed's line of thinking. They might still be really passionate about it and watch a lot of games. I don't know. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. What I want to know basically is this: if you still collect something, in particular, especially if you collect, say a modern player. If you're all collecting only vintage, then that might be it's a bit of a cop out, because at the end of the day, your point could be that you're not watching the modern game because the player you're collecting isn't there anymore. You collect Jackie Robinson, not watching Dodgers games this year. It's not really the same thing. It's not 2 and 2 together. It's not the Brooklyn Dodgers, certainly, and it's also not Jackie Robinson hasn't been on the team in a very long time, so I don't think that counts. It's not quite the same thing, but I'm curious if you do have any modern players or current players in your rotation, if you are an avid viewer still of the games. I know like an Ed or a Mike O definitely are. Scott, I know, watches a lot of games, so I'd use those examples. They definitely do. Like I said, I don't. So I'd be kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum, but I'd be curious if you do collect any current players, if you are still as passionately tied to the games themselves. Do you still watch it? And again, going back to what I said earlier, the more you observe, the more versed you will be if there are opportunities. Knowledge is power. So obviously watching the games can still be beneficial. For me, like I said, regular season doesn't do anything for me anymore. It's got to be playoffs, unless it's football, in which case I'll watch that anyway. I'll watch the Monday nighter and the Sunday nighter and the even the Thursday nighter. Some of them aren't very good, but I'll watch them. But again, it's less of a time commitment for me. Again, I'd rather watch season 3 of Reacher oftentimes. I could have a game on right now, but I'd rather go back and watch some more YouTube. And that's basically where my entertainment's going to come from tonight, other than my wrestling. So we're going to have that. Anyway, so that's it. More videos coming up on the channel. Live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Longest running episodic, whatever it is. A lot of silliness, a lot of nonsense. Eric will keep trying to convince us the Boston Bruins exist. They don't. He'll keep trying to convince us that Reborg is not a zombie. He is. And other lies that Eric will perpetuate upon us as he tries to continue his bid for 2025. Well, no, 2026. YouTube Sports Card Hall of Fame adjacency. The dream lives. The dream lives. The drive for 2026 will begin in earnest. Not really, but I'm sure he'll try anyway. He'll give it a shot. So that'll be it for this time around. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.